Uhuru.
We are back.
We're back. Come on in and join us. Come on in. We have a lot to talk about today. Come on in.
A lot.
Yeah, we got one. A spicy
And
episode.
spicy. I like that. It is spicy. Definitely that. Definitely
Yes.
that. Ooh, yes. Very, very excited. Come on in, y'all. Don't be shy. We don't bite. Well,
Even though we like a little bit, we talk the talk, but we don't bite. You're right.
we fight. Okay. we
We
say
don't bite, we fight. I like that.
no, we don't bite. We fight. Okay.
I want a T-shirt actually with the African
Yeah.
Socialist Party logo right at the bottom.
From the One Africa Worldview Podcast, of course,
Right.
coming up with
Development project. Like, hold on.
merch might need to be coming soon.
Listen, I love
the
me some mugs, so I would love an Africa Worldview mug.
Yeah.
Bucket hat. That would go
Come on.
crazy.
Let's get into it. And speaking of, let's go ahead and really get into it, y'all. Thank you all so much for coming in, tuning in. Make sure y'all are hitting that like button, that subscribe button. Come on, you need to follow us on the Burning Spirit TV YouTube and Burning Spirit Media Rumble, and downloading the Black Power 96 Radio app to listen to us, talk to you about, everything that's going on in the world today through the African internationalist perspective. Comrades, you are tuned in to the One Africa Worldview Podcast, and I am your host, Akilé, Director of Media and Communications for the African People's Socialist Party.
I know that's right. And I'm Solyana, Managing Editor for the longest running Black Power newspaper, The Burning Spear.
Yeah, and Uhuru. I'm Dr. Mariah, Promotions Coordinator for Black Power 96.3 FM, and we're based out of St. Petersburg, Florida, but available worldwide, y'all, through the Black Power 96 mobile app. And our show's airing now on Black Power 96 every week on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you check that out.
Yes. As always, we've got an excellent show lined up for you, and it starts with the Whirlwind Weekly Update, giving you African internationalist analysis on the day's top headlines. Then, in our primary objective, we have to deal with this Charlie Kirk issue, which has sent the colonial world into a frenzy. And we are discussing the role that Kirk played in reinforcing white nationalist ideology of the colonial mode of production. You've heard us talk about that, many times here, defining the social system as one based in a colonial mode of production. And in this era of deepening imperialist crisis, and we'll also say more about what that means, what appears like a rise in white nationalism is actually an indication of white power's decline. And we need not despair, right? We actually take advantage of the situation by getting organized. And then finally, in our For the Culture segment, we're discussing the latest work of famous anonymous artist Banksy, which was this latest piece, a sharp criticism of colonial law, particularly in London, causing the UK government to move quickly to cover it up. So let us kick this show off now with our first story in the Whirlwind Weekly Update regarding the latest in-school shootings inside the U.S. Comrade Mariah, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right on into it, y'all. So first, I want to say, did you know that the U.S. leads the world in school shootings, far surpassing any other country in the world, y'all? And the U.S. has an estimated 57 times more school shootings than any of the other 6 G7 nations combined. And under the colonial mode of production, this is normal and natural occurrence that we're told we must come to terms with and accept by forces like Charlie Kirk at that. So, as a Uhuru movement, we, of course, reject this idea that we must accept that our children, our educators, might serve as someone's target practice at any given moment, y'all. And that's why we're fighting for a whole new world. And with that said, this past week, we are once again confronting this heartbreaking reality of what it means to live under a violent, decaying colonial system. Within just days of each other, this time, 2 more school shootings have been devastated communities, one over in Denver, Colorado, and another in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So in Denver, a shooting at East High School left multiple students actually injured after a gunman opened fire near the campus during school hours. And just days later, over in Minneapolis, Another shooting took place in the parking lot of a local high school athletic event. This actually left one teen dead and some others there wounded. So this 2 weeks after a school shooting at a Catholic school in Minnesota, leaving 2 children dead and 21 people injured. All of these cases, y'all, just like we've seen countless times before, students, parents, and teachers, we're left to run, hide, cry, and somehow survive inside spaces that are supposed to be centers of learning and safety for our children. And U.S. President Donald Trump's response, of course, let's take a look at that, y'all.
It's horrible to see that happening. That's just horrible. So surprising to see it here. But I'll have to get over it.
You got to get over it, he says. So let's be clear. This isn't just about the individual shooters or anything like that. This is about society's collapse, y'all. And a society that has built on the world and the worst kinds of violence at that. A society where schools themselves have become battlegrounds. This is a natural outcome of a system that was never built to nurture life, especially Black life, y'all. And it forces us to see these events not as some random action, but as symptoms of the colonial mode of production. So for African children, this terror is even more compounded. In cities like Minneapolis, the same city, may I add, where George Floyd was murdered, where state violence is something that is routine there, and where schools are over-policed and underfunded, Black students don't even get the illusion of safety. They walk into buildings where police roam the halls, where metal detectors greet them right at the door, and where curriculum is stripped of the Black history, and where trauma is the daily atmosphere there. And let's talk about the media response when it comes to all this. In both Denver and Minneapolis shootings, we know what happens next. The state will tighten that security and more armed guards, lock more doors, funnel more money into something they call school safety that ultimately just means more policing, really. And meanwhile, the root causes of poverty, alienation, underfunding, isolation, even just state violence, the real problems, they're really never addressed. And this is why African self-determination is not just a slogan, y'all. It's a necessity. And because there's no safety when it comes to colonialism, not in the classroom, not on the playground, not in our homes, and definitely not in a system that lets children die in schools while politicians just argue over funding and send thoughts and prayers through press releases. So what we need are African-led solutions, Black community controls of the schools, spaces that don't criminalize Black youth, but uplift them. And we say no more waiting for the same state that created a crisis to solve it, y'all. No more trusting the system that care about Black life when it thrives on Black suffering. And now, comrade, I know you feel the same way. And I know that there's a lot going on over and across the pond, Comrade Solyana. You've got some information when it comes to that and when it comes to the African communities there that seize the land in Scotland. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much, Mariah, for taking us through that, really putting it into context with, these school shootings, school violences, all these different ways that African children and African youth are demonized and, assaulted is not a fluke of the system, right? It's a feature of the system. So I really appreciate you putting that into context. But yeah, so, it's an interesting twist for colonialism, right? Where a group of Africans have seized land in the woods near the town of Jedburgh, which is a few minutes drive north of the English border in Scotland. So this group is known, and they call themselves the Kingdom of Kubala, and they say that they are retaking the land that was stolen from their ancestors 400 years ago. Now, I know that's right? And the Scottish government obviously has responded with an eviction order saying that they are occupying private property and breaking the law. And I'm actually surprised that they haven't told them to occupy English land instead, but that's neither here nor there. But according to the BBC, this kingdom is made up of just 3 people right now who all hail from different areas of the African world, right? Their leader is from Ghana. His name is Kofi Ofe. He's 36. And there's also Jean Gasha, who's 42, who is originally from Zimbabwe, who first arrived in the Jedburgh area in the spring. And they describe themselves as King Atehehe and Queen Nandi. So you see that they have taken on African names, and that they were later joined by a quote unquote handmaiden whose name is Cora Taylor. She's actually from Texas, and she calls herself Asnat. So again, all of them have taken on African names. And so they've been told to, make themselves scarce, right, by Monday, as in today at 5 p.m. But their leader, Kofi, has sort of rebuffed those threats and instead is quoted to say, "The creator of the heavens and the earth is the one with us, and we are not afraid of whatever the so-called court has granted," unquote. So, though these Africans really are facing forced removal by the Scottish government, they nevertheless show just how, our land was seized through colonial domination and continues to be seized through colonialism and then now gentrification all over the world. So, the only thing is, except with the colonizer, their land seizure also comes with genocide, right? That's a feature of that system as well. So, and one of history's most recent examples of this is Israel and Palestine. The colonizer, unsurprisingly, calls foul on these practices only when it feels like its own interests are infringed upon. So, I just wanted to take this time to say salute to these Africans, for standing their ground and refusing to be bullied by the state. But going back to the U.S., Comrade Mariah, I know you got something for us regarding yet another deployment of troops, right?
Yeah. I want to salute those Africans too, and stand your ground. So, bringing it back home here. In the latest sign of deepening political crisis and that colonial breakdown, Donald Trump has announced plans to actually deploy National Guard troops to Chicago, Memphis, and New Orleans, following similar troop movements over in Washington, D.C. and parts of California that we've already seen. And the excuse here is what? Rising crime, public safety, and keeping order, according to him. But let's cut right through the propaganda and see what this really is for and what really is here. It's really materialized colonial occupation of Black communities, y'all. And let's be clear, these aren't just high crime cities. These are Black cities, African cities, cities with long histories of resistance, cities with organizing and rebellion against police terror, poverty, and oppression, y'all. And what the state fears most isn't just the crime, it's the actual uprising that's happening here. So they send in the soldiers, and we saw over in Chicago, this means rolling tanks and troops into neighborhoods already saturated with surveillance, police, and mass incarceration. And over in Memphis, where the people are still demanding justice for Tyree Nichols, the National Guard is being positioned as a deterrent to protest, not as a source of protection. So over in New Orleans, a city that is, we know, still scarred by Hurricane Katrina. We talked about that here on episode 15 of One Africa Worldview, and a city that has faced just decades of systematic neglect. And the military is returning once again, not to rebuild the city, but to control. And this, they say it's about violence, and we know it's really more about power. So this is about the crushing the spirit of the African people before another Ferguson, another Minneapolis, another moment of rebellion can take hold. And they fear the African working class becoming conscious, y'all, becoming organized. And so they send troops to stand guard over poverty, to defend the status quo with rifles and riot gear. But what they don't understand is that no amount of National Guard troops can really stop people who are waking up. And that's what's happening here. The more they clamp down, the more obvious it becomes this is a colony and a colonial democracy, and we are occupied people. And that occupation looks like police stations on every corner, y'all, underfunded schools, empty grocery stores, shelves, and now military patrols up and down our own neighborhood. So we must not be distracted by all this mess. We must not fall for the narrative that says this is for our own good, of course. African people don't need this occupation. Hell, we need liberation at this point. And because the truth is, if the state could have solved these issues, if it would have done so already, if that was the case. So they don't want solutions. They want submission. And we're not giving it this time. So while the National Guard sets up all these checkpoints in the Black cities across the country, we say, we see you. And we are organizing. We're building power outside of this colonial state because no one is coming to save us, y'all. We know that. Remember, we are the storm.
Yes, Garvey's whirlwind, if you will. And I just want to say to this, I got to say something. I want to say to this, that this is happening and all of these resources being funneled into the policing and the military occupation of the Black community, the domestic colony inside the US. At the same time, it's being reported that the economic situation for the US, particularly as it relates to employment and unemployment rates, is worse than it was during the era of COVID. So, here is this situation where, the United States is in profound economic crisis, right? And then it's spending all of these resources in the, colonial occupation of African communities and the wrangling up of colonized people, indigenous Mexican people inside this country. I mean, and so the relationship there, I just want us to be able to draw this relationship. I mean, if you needed another painting a picture of the way in which the colonial mode of production works and the way it thrives, and also a clear indication of the system's decline, you can see it in the way that it is pouring everything now into just outright military, formation, attack, and in a situation where the whole colonial capitalist economy is just irreparable. So I just wanted to point that out, because I saw that article today about the unemployment rate and just the crisis of the US economy right now. And and also just want to say to those brothers and sisters there in Scotland, reparations. So it's like, I'm gonna just take you out. I'm gonna just take your land right here. I'm just gonna take it. So period. Right. So yes. But yeah, like Comrade Mariah said, we are the storm. The thing that they they give you the weather forecast, and they now they're looking at us. We're on the weather forecast. So exactly. Thank you both for those weekly updates. Very, very important. And to have the African internationalists behind all of those, because with the mass shootings and things like that, that's always characterized as this contradiction between whether or not people have the right to bear arms and have too much access or not enough access to guns and stuff like that. I mean, when we talk about gun control, we need to be looking at the police, which is what I think, Comrade Mariah, you helped to point out just now. So it's not, but that's not what the struggle is about. And, eliminating the amount of people walking down the street every day with a gun does not minimize the gun violence that African and colonized people experience, inside of this country, getting gunned down by the police. I was thinking when you're talking about not being safe on playgrounds, thinking of Tamir Rice, as one of those examples, or Ayanna Stanley Jones, 9 years old, sleeping in her bed at home. So we're looking at it, like you pointed out, a colonial mode of production, a social system that breeds a culture of violence, as Chairman Amalia Shatella has summed up and has been, frequently summed up inside our movement. So, yeah. Again, thank you both so much for just breaking all that down, because you cannot open up a newspaper and see that unless it's the burning spear. So, but let's go ahead now and head into our primary objective. As promised, we're going to be talking about Charlie Kirk in the context of the decline of white power, because please don't believe we're going to give, this person a platform without, contextualizing, what we're talking about him for, because other than that, what is he, a gnat? On an elephant's ass, what they say. Right. And I also, just as we get into our primary objective, I want to point out here, love pointing things out. Let me start. I want to point out that last week, I know we had a show dedicated to summing up the role of white people and making it clear that if white people are to know a future of peace, free of crisis and oppression from their own ruling class, that the way forward is under the leadership of the African working class in the form of the African People's Socialist Party. And in that episode, we made it clear that there is another way out, of this mess that they have historically created for themselves, the hole that they've kept digging, right? But we said there is a way out. And we had Comrade Jesse Neville on, one of the Uhuru three. He's also the chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And he was on with us to talk about how white people can get organized under our leadership. And the very next day, this person, Charlie Kirk, is killed. So for many of us, the first time we learned about Charlie Kirk, I'll say, and me included, actually, it was more so of putting a face to a name to a face that I had seen,
Mhm.
but didn't engage in, because he crosses your timeline. But if you're not interested in that kind of crap, then you're not gonna watch it.
Right. He looks like every other conservative white man next to Trump. Like he blends in.
I was like, oh, okay, moving on.
Right.
And so it was the first time you learned of Charlie Kirk, whether it's the first time you saw him, learned the name, whatever. And it was the first time many of us learned about him, because the day that he was killed, the media put this story on a loop. Like, it was, and still talking about it, to this day. All the people that have been dying over the last couple of days, since our last show, and Charlie Kirk is the one that's making all the headlines. And you would have thought the attempted Trump assailant finally learned where to aim. You would have thought, because the way they're treating Kirk is like how they treated JFK or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is how prominent of a figure he's been regarded as. So, that's how, Kirk's death has been treated, like a national tragedy. I mean, they're lowering flags. They're at football games, at NFL games, like taking moments of silence and stuff. This is a big deal for them, and for the colonizer and their little band of sympathizers, I'll say, because there are those. I gotta call them weirdos. these people over here. And once most of us learned more about the Kirk person, we concluded that we would be able to sleep, and and in the words of Trump.
It's horrible to see that happening. That's just horrible. So surprising to see it here. But I'll have to get over it.
Right.
Wow.
That's warfare.
Get over it, he says. Wow.
Yeah. So from his own comrade. Okay, but all jokes aside, right? We do need to say something about who Kirk was, because he was clearly an important figure in this resurgence of naked colonialism. And this simply meaning that there's no pretense of democracy for Black people. There's no concealment of our colonial domination, like the Democratic Party would be parading and prancing around and, taking a knee and wearing kente cloth and things like that. And, it was supposed to, make us feel as though, we had achieved some kind of power, some, economic, political power inside this country, whatever. So, but right now it's just naked. It's in your face. It's blatant. And, it's not hiding behind anything. It's a visible and and as irrefutable as we've seen it be historically. And Kirk is a colonizer who was given a platform to perpetuate the illogical white nationalist ideology that was born from our enslavement, colonization, and oppression. So you have a system born through colonialism, and then you have to have ideas that support that system of colonialism. And you have institutions that allow you to, develop, package, and distribute the ideas of that social system. So Kirk was a part of that process of, again, perpetuating, this white nationalist ideology of the colonial mode of production. And in this period of the deepening crisis of imperialism, triggered by, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela, leader and founder of the African People's Socialist Party, defines it, this uneasy equilibrium that has been caused by the emergence of anti-colonial struggle throughout the world. We see white nationalism now being used, as it always has been, to justify the increasing and open attacks against our people, certainly inside the US, but as well as in places like Europe and Palestine. For instance, just like Comrade Mariah, you were saying, about the troops being deployed in high crime cities. So, we get painted as criminals. This is part of the white nationalist ideology. We're the criminals. Just like back then when we were getting lynched as a part of a national pastime in this country, we were the rapists, and predators and things like that. So it's the same thing. We are the colonizers defining us now, in part to justify the violence that is being carried out against us, and sometimes by regular everyday white people. But in this case, the colonial state, right? The colonial state now has permission to, to carry out this violence, this repression against Black people, colonized people inside this country. And the basis for that is because, we are the criminals. All the crime is concentrated, right here. So I just think that, it's really important to draw these things out, how this is all in correlation to this intensified attack we see happening against our people. And the same is true for Palestine and the murdering of Palestinians by the settler colony of Israel, and how Palestinians are defined, and just being regarded as the ones who are violent and the ones who have asked for the bombings against them, and the actual genocidaires being the ones who get to define these colonized people, whose land they're trying to take over. So anyway, as colonial white power is fighting for its life, because that's what it's doing, it's on its deathbed, and we see the colonial state intensifying its assault on our people, abandoning their own colonial law. Like, they're saying, we don't even care about the laws that we have put in place to govern ourselves. Man, bump it, whatever, throw it out. No longer trying to maintain a modicum of imperialist peace. Just screw it. It's to the wall now. That's why the National Guard troops are being deployed in light of this unceasing anti-colonial resistance. Like you said, it's anticipating Ferguson level, Minneapolis level, St. Pete level resistance inside this country. And because it's also of what's happening around the world. That consciousness that is developing has developed, especially within the last 10 years, for African people, indigenous people inside this country, those of us who are in Africa, recognizing neocolonialism, the puppets of the US government, those of us in Europe, etc. I mean, being able to come to these conclusions, they are anticipating, our resistance, right? So they're getting set up, they're lining up there. So Kirk was an important tool in unifying a sector of the colonizer population. Over the past several decades, the colonizer population has experienced this ideological disunity that, not just the left and the right, the Democrats and the Republicans, but just in general, like this pulling away from their colonial ruling class. So it's something that's been experienced over the last several decades, which can be attributed to our intervention. That when I say our, I mean the African People's Socialist Party, Chairman Amalia Shatela's intervention, in part with the development of the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. We gave white people another way forward, and we've been working that strategy since 1976. And we've seen, this strategy of white solidarity with Black power coming back to us, so many times over. And we saw, just in the last couple of years, like Aaron Bushnell, who committed this act of martyrdom, like Comrade Jesse said last week. This is a reflection of the intervention that we have made in this process among the colonizer population, fracturing that unity with their own ruling class, right? So, and as the crisis of the world economic order defined by the colonial mode of production is deepened, the lives that had ordinarily been promised for the colonizer is no longer something that can be guaranteed for them. So now they're facing the issue of, my kids can't go to college, I can't buy a house, we can only afford one kid, whatever. Like, it's experiencing these things that their parents and their parents before that, they didn't have these same kind of issues, these same kind of struggles. Their futures were guaranteed. They had enough money and money to leave behind. That is something that white people are now running into this wall. That's a new phenomenon for the colonizer, when you have a world built for your benefit. So, but because this economic configuration is being strained by anti-colonial developments happening around the world, again, this is something that can no longer be guaranteed. And they have begun to experience this crisis for themselves. And that has contributed to this fractured colonized population. So the colonizer is out there in the world, and it's looking for leadership because it can't trust its government. It can't trust the leaders that they've normally followed before. It's not working for them no more. So not seeing their interests also in the Democratic Party, not seeing their interest in carrying on in the old way, Trump, and this is the threat of Trump, like, to the Democratic Party, and in this sector of the colonial ruling class, Trump was a threat because he was able to win these white people who are out there in search of new leadership. So Trump has represented a way forward for a massive sector of the colonizer population. So there is this movement, and they've been characterized as MAGA movement, which is simply, these people who have blind support for white nationalist violence against African and colonized people. Kirk was one of the forces that helped to build support for this movement, the far right, or however, the sector characterizes themselves, uniting white people against the quote unquote lazy, barbaric, savage blacks and Indians and things like that. This is what Kirk played a role in. This was what his job was to pull together this fractured colonizer population, funneling them towards this movement under right now Trump's leadership. But for us, we must be clear that what appears to be a rise in white nationalism being expressed is not an indication of the world moving in favor of the colonizer. So, yes, we see a lot of iterations of it. It's no longer concealed. It's all over the place. And they're not apologetic for it. Kirk was not apologetic about, his white nationalist beliefs and understandings about the world. He was not. So yeah, nobody's making apologies for coming up to you, calling you out your name, and that's not happening, right? But it's not based on the fact that there's some kind of strength in this in this social system anymore. It's the exact opposite. This social system has to express itself in this way because it cannot explain otherwise why they're dropping bombs on Gaza, or sending troops into Chicago, or corralling Black people on horseback, or putting Mexicans in concentration camps in response to our growing unity, our resistance, and our will to be free. They cannot explain it otherwise. That's why that's why I say it was illogical. White nationalism is illogical because when we stand up here and we give a sound argument to the about why the system is the way it is, why we experience the kind of oppression, and then we get this blowback that has nothing to do with what's in the real world. It just has everything to do like this foaming at the mouth, we hate you, kind of response. But otherwise it cannot explain it, and it cannot stand up to us African internationalists. Ideologically it cannot. So they use the military because they cannot have a debate about it, so they have to use the state. And it can't explain why it cannot even allow us to speak about our conditions, or they'll send tanks and flashbang grenades at you at 5 o'clock in the morning, like they did with our chairman and our movement. And they can't give a basis, for that. So, like I said, they can't even within their own social system, they have these laws that define, how they do things. They can't even uphold those things anymore. They have to attack their own First Amendment freedom of speech because you can't even talk about this anymore. We're not out there, with tiki torches and pitchforks, like they have been known to do in recent years, by the way. We're out here talking about our conditions, writing about our conditions, and we're getting attacked by the colonial state. So this is explaining kind of the desperate situation that white power is in. And we see this white nationalist ideology spewed at the same time that world colonial powers face existentialist threat from emerging and competing world powers like Russia, China, BRICS, all these forces that they've tried to militarily control at one point or another in history. And it has, in the long term been ineffective. So these powers have emerged regardless of what the U.S. desired for them. And all of this is a signal, again, of weakness. And for white people who have decided to follow the likes of Trump and Kirk, it's becoming clear to see that you've chosen the wrong leadership. It's the wrong leadership. So for us in this period, we cannot be deterred by what we're seeing here. And, as comical as some of this stuff might be out there on the internet, we don't need to be long-term invested and engaged in a back and forth about what is ethically, morally okay to say or do about, somebody who pretty much advocated for your extermination. How to feel about it, how to post about it, people losing their jobs, people fearing for their lives, HBCUs getting, threats and things like that. I mean, this is, serious business. But again, for us, we can't get trapped in this because there's always going to be a colonizer who's saying some not pretty things about colonized people. Of course they would. Of course these forces are out there and that's what they're doing because their whole identity is rooted in our oppression. There would be no colonizer identity. There would be no white people. There would be no white superiority complex, whatever, if there had not been for, you know, the development of this social system on our back. So yes, they have these ideas in their heads about who we are, and we don't need to get tit for tat about, you know, about the ideas in their heads. We got to keep fighting for power, because like Chairman said, power is a great aphrodisiac. You know, what if you have power, somebody has to think twice now about what they say about you, right? So again, our responsibility as you know, African people and as freedom loving people, we have to get organized. This is the period to get organized under revolutionary leadership, and specifically the leadership of the Uhuru movement. It's time to get organized. No more, you know, this system is going down, and it's lashing out violently, and it's not something to take lightly. You know how because when you think about somebody who's desperate and fighting for its life, ain't they giving it everything they've got? They've given it everything they got, the last little bit. They are fighting. And so, you know, when we are organized, it increases our capacity to respond, you know, to such attacks, prepare for such attacks, and prevent such attacks. So, and our responsibility as members of, you know, this movement and as African internationalists is to stay the course, right? To not allow for these incidents to distract or define what our Tuaden is. Our overall mission is to complete the Black Revolution. Our overall mission is to destroy this colonial mode of production. And through that, we birth a new society with brand new ideas, right? And in fact, the ideas of our new society are being discussed right now. We're talking about them. These are, you know, because we can envision a future where no kid has to be gunned down in an educational institution. We can see that future. We can build that. We have the capacity to do that right now. You know, we see the future, the ability to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. And, you know, and not have to worry about, police, you know, in our communities, occupying our communities, and threatening our every existence. I mean, our very existence, sorry. You know, we can see that, and we're building for that future, right? So, and the last thing I'll say to this, and I'll hand it over because I've been talking a lot, is, you know, to the colonizer population, to white people, you know, tuning in, watching, listening, wherever you are. The leadership of white people does not have to be the captain of a sinking ship. Okay, you've done the Titanic before. You ain't got to do that again. You don't have to. And, you know, we summed it up. This is a sinking ship. And I don't have to talk about it. You don't have to listen to me. You can look at all the evidence out there in the world that suggests, and even the ruling class pundits of this system can't see a future for this system. Can't see it. Everything is bleak, you know, for them. So that doesn't have to be your reality. You can, in fact, embrace the leadership of the African working class by joining the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So again, I've spoken a lot. So let me take a breath and let me pass it over to these brilliant comrades here. Solyana and Mariah, what's
Yeah, you're here. I just jump in real quick, and yeah. You summed that up perfectly. And just saying where you mentioned that it's a decline. It is the destruction, and that is really what we have to talk about. And honestly, whenever this happened, we knew this Charlie Kirk died, was killed there. Okay, then what happened there? The media moved so fast, the supporters moved so fast to start doing what? Create and spin all these narratives, and that's what we have to talk about, y'all. It's just about that, what his whole life actually really represented, and that legacy that he had represented when it comes to that. Because Charlie Kirk, it didn't just represent a person, y'all. He represented this whole political project. And he was a reactionary, a white nationalist machine whose entire purpose was to maintain this whole colonial status quo. And he built this whole platform, y'all, just blaming Black people, blaming transgender people, blaming immigrants, blaming women, and just anyone who dared to challenge the lies that this country tells itself. And he just really didn't even offer any solutions. He offered all these scapegoats. And in the final years of his life, we really saw that happen. And it made it clear he wasn't just this sad. He wasn't thoughtful. He wasn't just searching for any truth. He was doubling down on what, y'all? Division, the doubling down on hate, doubling down on holding the line for a dying empire. So now we're not just here to perform this grief for this man who used voice power to punch down, to lie, and to incite violence against colonized people. But we are here to tell the truth. And Charlie Kirk's politics weren't about freedom, y'all. They were about fear. And fear of a world where white power doesn't rule unchecked. That's all it is. Fear of a world where Black people, queer people, oppressed people are not just surviving, but organizing, rising, and reclaiming power, y'all. So that's the deeper story when it comes to this Charlie guy. Charlie's death just isn't the end of one man, y'all. It's a symbol of the cracks in this empire. The system he fought to preserve is falling apart right in front of us. And he knew that. And that's why the rhetoric just gets louder and louder. And that's why the scapegoating got uglier and uglier. And it was panic. Panic, y'all, not power. So we don't celebrate this death, but we do name what's real. And Charlie Kirk was an agent of colonial reaction. And his voice helped justify the very violence we organize against every single day. So let this moment be a wake-up call, y'all. A wake-up, not for any grief, but for clarity. Because when their mouthpieces fall silent, it's not the end of the fight. It's confirmation that the tide is turning, y'all. And we honor life by building a new world, a world without Charlie Kirk's politics, a world rooted in self-determination, a world where the African working class holds power. So that's why we say one Africa, one nation.
Yes, Uhuru.
No, I absolutely agree. And I feel like both of you definitely touched on everything that I, wanted to mention. And I really unite with just putting it to context, because he is just an individual. But again, like, what he's representing is not just vested in him, but in this colonial capitalist system. And I also just wanted to mention, particularly because what we're seeing in the wake of his assassination is this talk about like political violence. And in this whole discussion around political violence, and it's only being raised, when the gun is turned on a white nationalist like Charlie Kirk, right? As if political violence is something that has not been part and parcel to the very creation of the United States as we know it. And not just like in a historical sense, but just a few years ago with the FBI attack on the Uhuru movement, and just many, many other organizations and organizers that have been, in prison for trumped up charges, as well as the arrest and deportation of international students showing support for Palestine. And now the apparently legalized racial profiling of Mexican and indigenous people that literally is going to allow ICE to just pick up anyone that is brown and speaks Spanish. I mean, where is the talk of political violence in the wake of all of these different things? When political violence has been, again, something that's existing under a Democrat or a Republican, and really is a tool that's used to maintain whatever, like you guys mentioned, whatever dying and receding hegemony that the West has left. So I think it's really important to like contextualize too when and why the legacy media, bourgeois media, the US government talk about political violence and who's really the target of it, and how by the very existence of a revolutionary organization like ours, the African People's Socialist Party, an organization whose existence and goal sort of poses a threat to the very existence of colonialism. By all these different projects that we mentioned in the show, we've had Deputy Chair Ona Zanesh on the show talk about the African People's Education and Defense Fund and the Black Power Blueprint, all these different things that we do actively. Political violence becomes the sort of modus operandi, the way that the government, whether on a national or a local level, deals with us, engages with us, right? Because African self-determination is in direct conflict with this logic of colonialism. And one other thing I just want to quickly mention before I know we got to switch gears soon is just how it's really annoying, but also very much how in line with the way that, sort of politics and political discourse is structured and shaped, especially when dealing with, like I said, bourgeois media, right? In the ways that these particular issues are framed when thinking about, like, now we're talking about Charlie Kirk's murder, but also what's going on in Palestine. And so what I mean is, like, it becomes sort of politically correct to mourn for Charlie Kirk and his sympathize with his family, regardless of the kinds of regressive or backward politics that he was, spouting and eschewing while he was alive. Like, in the same way that, people were expected to condemn Hamas and Palestinian struggle and their just resistance against a colonial occupation. I mean, this political system has it so that oppressed people's experiences are not only shunned, but denied. Our resistance not only put down, but then delegitimized. And then our political positions and orientations that's informed by those objective conditions that we face because of colonialism and continues to treat us that way becomes an aberration. It becomes fringe or anti-Semitic or racist, as we've seen in these trolls and these comments. So I think it's really important that, you know, when we talk about this, people don't feel disempowered when it comes to engaging in these discussions, and don't concede any political ground or territory when we're asked these like entrapping questions like, oh, so you don't condemn political violence? Oh, so you're okay with people getting killed for what they believe in? Because your response needs to be, or needs to point out, how one's political position has always been a target and a justification for violence waged on African and colonized people. That's how we've been functioning under. So no, you're not gonna mourn for Charlie Kirk, right? In the same way that you would have mourned for David Duke, the Grand Wizard. Like, what, you know what I mean? And so, or any other permutation of a white nationalist ideologue. So I think it's really important that when, you know, folks are engaging in these discussions and these struggles, to like put it into context of what we have been experiencing, because that will inform how you know, come out of these struggles. And I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Uhuru. Excellent, comrades. Yeah, we are going to move it, but I think that was just brilliantly put. And I think I just wanted to say, you know, that the chronically online trolls, you know, make our point that they can't stand up to, you know, African internationalist ideology, and that they just resort to, you know, being reactionary. They resort to name calling and all these kinds of things, and cannot refute the position that you just laid out. They cannot, you know, speak to any of these things. And then some more eloquent forces will, you know, try that political or that entrapment, like you said, in terms of the discussion, but then mum's the word when, you know, asked about, you know, their position on the deaths of all these Palestinians and you know, the death of Africans inside this country. I mean, you know, Kirk wasn't talking about Moore and George Floyd. He said, you know, Floyd was, you know, all these things, right? So you know, and it's not even, the colonizer is not expected to mourn, you know, any symbols of African or colonized resistance or anything like that. There is no, you know, there is no holding flag at half mast for the murder of Patrice Lumumba, you know, or, you know, there was no stop the world when Chairman Amali Chitela was being attacked, you know, by the FBI or anything like that, when free speech, you know, in this country is under attack. Like, there, you know, so I just think all that's really profound. And, you know, there are these forces that are there, and most oftentimes when you're talking to them, you know, they have not been able to grasp, you know, any other idea that, you know, does not support or reinforce this social system. So, you know, but that's okay, because we still engage in struggle anyhow. And despite the worst ideas in people's heads, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. So, and we're going to and keep winning in the process. I have to emphasize winning in the process. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into with the remaining time that we have. We do have a good for the culture discussion for you guys. And Comrade Solyana, I'm going to pass it to you to tell us a little bit about this piece.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So for the culture, we're actually talking about the Banksy's latest painting, right? So on Monday, September 8th, the famed London-based anonymous artist posted a picture of his latest work to his 13.7 million followers on IG. This painting, which is now being covered and scrubbed by the UK government, depicts a British judge. You know, they be wearing those white traditional wigs on to this day. And this painting shows a judge beating a protester with his gavel, with the protester's blood splattered on this sign that he's carrying. And so Banksy posted this with the caption, "Royal Courts of Justice, London." And so this is basically where their courts are swarming with security. So people are like really thinking about, how did he even manage to do this? So people are like talking about whether he has people, you know, in the system that are like helping him with this, but he managed that. And though he says very little about, you know, very little in his caption, and follow-up interviews are really impossible because he's famous for being anonymous. What Banksy seeks to critique here is really clear to a lot of people. In July of this year, the UK deemed the Palestine Action Organization a terrorist group. We actually mentioned this in one of our episodes for our headline. And they made, you know, membership in this organization, as well as public show of support for this organization, punishable by law. On September 6th alone, there were actually more than 425 people arrested just for protesting against this ban.
Wow, wow. And yeah, since the passing of this law, we also see that there have been critiques from a variety of voices regarding the legality of it, actually, in such a law when it comes to the United Kingdom's own definition of terrorism and whether Palestinian action fits such a description, as well as the chilling effect on free speech such a law can actually have. So, but coming back to the actual Banksy, for those of us who may not be familiar, Banksy has been active in the street art scene since about the early 90s. His art style has been described as anti-authoritarian, and some of his early work includes painting of cops in unceremonious positions, to say the least. So, through this painting is the latest example of his support for Palestine. Banksy has something to say as far back as 2005. About 10 years ago, Banksy traveled to the West Bank in Palestine with his team and put up a series of artworks on what is known as the segregation wall. The wall stretches across occupied Palestinian land and is over 450 miles long and 38 feet high, y'all. This project was obviously done in protest to the Israeli occupation. And in the wake of the 2005 project, Banksy related a statement echoing what many others are saying, that this wall essentially turns Palestine into the world's largest open prison. And so this 2025 painting on the walls of the Royal Courts of Justice in London shows a really symbolic way just how law has been always used to arbitrarily when it comes to African and colonized people. So free speech, which the West likes to constantly cite as one of its founding doctrines of its bourgeois democracy, has only ever really been for the kind of free speech that does not challenge that status quo. So if this was not the case, why would they be so quick to cover this painting up, y'all? And why would the United Kingdom ban a pro-Palestine organization if free speech were an actual tenet they believed in?
Yes, and this whole thing reminds me of the historic case of the Uhuru 3 just concluded at the end of last year. Because after the FBI raids on leaders of the Uhuru movement in St. Louis, Missouri, and St. Petersburg, Florida, what we now call the anti-colonial free speech trial of the century unfolded, where the US's very selective treatment of free speech was revealed. And of all the organizations that they came after the one that was doing the most to materially transform the conditions of African people through various economic development projects that are dual and contending. This means that they're not charity or mutual aid, but projects that build self-determination to African people, and so that African people are not dependent on anybody but ourselves, and are free to produce and reproduce life for ourselves, which is in direct opposition to what the colonial mode of production requires from us. And again, as opposed to the colonizer, which is what the system has us do. So, and I would just, say, to this as well, that, I think that mural also reflected, the illegitimate colonizer law, and that how it weaponizes the law for the purposes of oppression, and just as we've seen in this case, where it used its illegitimate colonial law against Chairman Amali Shatella and the Uhuru 3 to make a political attack, political violence against the leadership of the African Revolution. So that's what I would like to take also from Banksy's contribution.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why Chairman says law is the opinion of the ruling class. I mean, this is another great example of just how it's always been arbitrary, no matter, what kind of tenets and how old their, documents and constitutions are. Ultimately, those ideologies that informed ultimately the, what they cite as their tenets: free speech, democracy, individual freedom, all of these things, like you mentioned, Director Akilé, are founded upon the colonial exploitation of Africa. So in its basis, it's illegitimate. And so they use it however they want to.
Yeah, because Europe lived under feudalism, right? And so the type of government and things that they experience now, like you said, came as a consequence of that colonial assault on Africa, and the colonial domination of Africa and the world's peoples. I mean, this is anyway. So yeah, even the law inside of Europe is colonial law, and is a colonial system, and it's a process that they're able to exercise because it rescued itself from a whole different type of process, which didn't allow regular everyday white people freedom. So
right. Listen, we're about to do this whole thing to a history class because
I love Banksy. He stays getting into that ass.
how he get this up there? Don't worry about it.
I love it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Comrade Solyana, and for this, bringing this to our attention. This very engaging for the culture piece. I love the for the culture segments here. I got to say. And just giving you a greater, deeper appreciation, or a sharper analytical eye, when it comes to, different cultural pieces. Right. So with that, we're going to go ahead now and get into our announcements, because we talked about getting organized, and we're not just saying that out into the void and you got to go figure out which organization to join or whatever. We finna let you know how to get involved. So, Comrade Mariah, can you take us through the announcements, please?
Yeah. Get involved. And if you're interested in getting connected with the Uhuru movement by way of joining, supporting, or volunteering, here are some upcoming events that you can tap right into. So, first, we wanted you to join the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition on Thursday, September 18th at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, as Uhuru 3 legal team lays out the main issues in the recent Uhuru 3 appeal filed in June. The legal team is currently preparing oral arguments for this appeal, which could set historic precedents in the fight to guarantee the exercise of First Amendment rights for all. Also featured will be an update on the case of the Black is Back Coalition Vice Chair and Hands Off Uhuru member Lisa Davis, who is fighting bogus charges for standing up against the U.S.-backed attack on the Palestinian people, as well as a report from the Latin American fronts of Hands Off Uhuru, and you can register at handsoffyahoo.org/register. That's handsoffyahoo.org/register. Also, you can register for the upcoming NPDM convention held Saturday, September 20th through Sunday, September 21st in St. Louis, Missouri. The theme for this year is Cheers to a Dying Colonialism, this time till it's won. The theme reflects the revolutionary optimism that we feel right now in moments of colonial crisis. It is our duty to tip the system over, not to prop it up. Africans have not taken these attacks lightly. All around the world, we are rising up. We know that we can lead our people to victory at this moment because NPDM was created for this movement and this moment in time. Let's seize it, and you can register at npdm2025.eventbrite.com. That's npdm2025.eventbrite.com. And on Saturday, September 20th, you can join the northern region of the African People's Socialist Party in West Philly's beautiful Clark Park for the 10th One Africa, One Nation book fair and marketplace. This free all-day program will feature live music, poetry, free education resources, giveaways, a children's circle, special activities for families, food, and over 100 marketplace vendors. Visit oneafricamarketphilly.org for more info. That's oneafricamarketphilly.org. So y'all, for more events and everything else going on, visit theburningspear.com/events. And of course, we'll be keeping you updated right here on One Africa Worldview. So make sure you're locked in, subscribe on all of our socials. So make sure you check us out and follow us there.
All right. Well, that is it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get notifications for when we go live. We stream on the Burning Spear TV YouTube, Burning Spear Media Rumble channels, and now on Black Power 96.3 FM, radio based in St. Petersburg, Florida on your FM dial, or streaming globally on the Black Power 96 mobile app. Download it, get it, listen to it. So until next week, comrades, One Africa,
One Nation.
Through.